Welcome, everyone! Today, we're diving into a what-if scenario set in the Naruto universe. The story is called Naruto Copy System by Dragon NX. If you're intrigued by this amazing tale, be sure to check out the full story through the link in the description. Half a year passed in a flash. The war had been raging for 6 months. Konoha, Suna, Iwa, and Omegakure were locked in a bloody conflict. Even Konoha's genin were being deployed to the battlefield. Shin and his team were also on the front lines. If even genin were being sent, Chunin like them were indispensable. War is so cruel. These people are so unfortunate. Mikoto looked at the gaunt and fearful civilians of the Land of Rain with pity. The Land of Rain was already impoverished due to its harsh climate. Now, ravaged by war, it was filled with refugees. Even as refugees, they had to hide, afraid of encountering shinobi. To them, ninja were no different from demons. Everyone knows war is cruel, but the rewards are too tempting, Shin said softly. Without conflicts of interest, there would be no war. What are you guys sighing about? Aren't you hungry? Kushina complained. I'm starving. We have rations. Kushina took out the rations and glared at Shin. You eat one and show me. Ahum, I'm not hungry. Shin looked away. The rations were rock hard. This is what they gave us. How are we supposed to eat this? Use it to sharpen our teeth? Kushina grumbled. Konoha seemed to be low on funds. They had to make do with these for now. If they wanted decent food, they'd have to wait for the Land of Fire's daimyo to provide more funding. Let's go find something to eat. If they wanted good food, they had to hunt for it themselves. They entered the forest, the drizzle soaking their clothes. Shin wasn't sure if there were any animals left in this forest. They weren't the only ones hunting. This damned weather. It rains 9 days out of 10, and the one day it doesn't, it's cloudy. Shin looked up at the overcast sky. He had been on the battlefield for half a month and hadn't seen the sun once. After searching for a while, they finally found a rabbit. A scrawny one, but it was better than nothing. Mikoto roasted the rabbit, ending its miserable life. Smells good. Kushina's eyes sparkled. Kushina, you're drooling, Shin teased. Kushina quickly wiped her mouth, then realized there was no drool. You tricked me, she glared at Shin. Shin shrugged. It was her fault for being so gullible. Roar. A roar echoed through the forest. Shin's eyes lit up. It sounded like a bear. I'll go check it out. Maybe we can have bear for dinner. Shin informed Kushina and Mikoto, then vanished in a flash. Hey, I want to come too. Kushina jumped up. Kushina, stay here, Mikoto said, gently pushing her back down. Shin followed the sound of the roar and found the bear. It was charging towards a small, dirty girl. The girl stood frozen in fear, her eyes wide with terror. The bear wasn't that big, but it was more than capable of killing a child. Lucky for you, I happened to be passing by. Shin threw an ice blue kunai. It embedded itself in the bear's head, and the bear collapsed. Shin appeared next to the bear. It wasn't small, but it was thin, almost malnourished. Most of the edible resources in this forest had been hunted by shinobi. This bear probably hadn't eaten a decent meal in a while. Are you all right? Shin turned to the girl, who was still cowering with her eyes closed. She was covered in dirt, but her light blue hair was beautiful. I am fine. She opened her eyes, looking at Shin with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She was grateful he had saved her, but she was also afraid of him. He was a shinobi. Shinobi were feared and hated in the Land of Rain. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill a child, Shin reassured her. He ignored her and picked up the bear carcass, preparing to leave. Wait. The girl called out weakly. Here, this is for you, thank you for saving me. She offered Shin a mushroom she had been holding. Shin smiled. What's your name? Konan. She spoke softly, her head lowered. She was both grateful and terrified of Shin. You Konan? Shin's mind flashed to Konan, the angel of the Akatsuki. He looked at her light blue hair, then stepped closer and wiped the dirt from her face. Her young features seemed vaguely familiar. It really was Konan of the Akatsuki. She hadn't met Yahiko and Nagato yet, or she wouldn't be alone. Konan looked at Shin, her eyes filled with fear. Come with me. Shin picked her up with one arm and the bear with the other, then vanished in a flash. The heavy bear didn't slow him down at all. You're finally back. We were about to come looking for you. Who's this little girl? Kushina looked at Konan curiously. I found her. She looked pitiful, so I brought her back, Shin said. Of course, Konan's identity was also a factor. He was quite fond of Konan, the angel of the Akatsuki. She does look pitiful. And cute. Kushina examined Konan, then looked at Shin suspiciously. Had he brought her back because she was cute? Why else would he be so compassionate? Shin enjoyed his roasted rabbit, ignoring the curious stares from Kushina and Mikoto. He cleared his throat. Kushina, Mikoto, is something wrong with the rabbit? Why are you staring at me like that? We're just curious, Mikoto said. They were both puzzled by Shin bringing Konan back. They didn't believe he had done it out of pure compassion. What's there to be curious about? Finish eating, and let's head back to camp to report, Shin said. They were on a mission to scout for enemy shinobi in the area. Konan, here's a rabbit leg for you. Shin offered Konan a leg. Konan looked at him timidly, then at the rabbit leg with longing, but she didn't dare take it. Go on, eat. Don't be afraid, Mikoto said gently. Yeah, we won't hurt you, Kushina added. Unable to resist the temptation, Konan finally took the rabbit leg and nibbled on it. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She had managed to find some mushrooms, but then she encountered the bear and almost died. A single rabbit wasn't enough, so they roasted the mushrooms Konan had found and a bear paw as well. Bear paw is so good. What about the rest? Kushina looked at the bear carcass. There were 3 more paws, and they hadn't even touched the meat. We can't waste it. Shin sealed the carcass in a scroll. Konan, are you coming with us, or are you going to continue wandering around? Shin asked Konan. Come with us. It's dangerous for a little girl to be alone, Kushina said. The entire land of rain is dangerous right now. You should stay with us, Mikoto added. You really want me to come with you? Konan asked timidly. She was young, but the war had forced her to mature quickly. She knew she was a burden. It's your choice, Konan. If you want to come with us, you can. If you want to leave, we won't stop you, Shin said. He wouldn't force her either way. I want to go with you, Konan said, looking at Shin. All right, let's go then. Shin smiled and led Konan out of the forest. They arrived at a small town. Due to the war, it was practically deserted. They bought Konan some new clothes at a clothing store, then found an inn and had Mikoto help Konan wash up and change. She was covered in mud from being chased by the bear. They then headed back to the Konoha camp. No one questioned them about the little girl, they were Tsunade students, after all. This was the battlefield between Konoha and Suna. Orochimaru was the commander, with Tsunade and Jiraiya as his deputies. No one would question them. As for the original commander, Sakumo Hatake, he had been transferred to the Iwa front. They went to find Tsunade. She was surprised to see Konan. Who's this little girl? Tsunade asked Shin. Her name is Konan. I saved her in the forest and brought her back. She can stay with you for now. Shin and his team often went on missions. It was better for Konan to stay with Tsunade, who was responsible for treating the injured and developing antidotes for Chiyo's poison. Tsunade rarely participated in direct combat. Tsunade frowned. Wasn't it dangerous to bring a stranger into the camp? She could be a spy. Don't worry, Shin said, sensing her concern. Tsunade trusted Shin. She nodded and said to Konan, "You can stay with me for now." Konan took a step back and looked at Shin, clinging to his clothes. She was anxious in this unfamiliar environment. Only Shin, her savior, could give her a sense of security. "Don't worry, Konan. If I'm in camp, you can stay with me. But if I'm on a mission, you'll have to stay with Tsunade. It's too dangerous to take you with me." Shin pinched Konan's cheek. It was so soft, he couldn't resist pinching it again. Konan blushed and nodded. "Tsunade, we have a problem." Jiraiya and Orochimaru suddenly arrived. Their presence meant trouble. Jiraiya looked at Konan curiously. "Didn't you say there was a problem? Tell us what it is." Yeah, business first." Jiraiya turned serious. He wasn't interested in some random little girl. "I'll explain. The Third Kazekage is here," Orochimaru said. It was better than letting Jiraiya waste time with his rambling. "What?" Tsunade's eyes widened in alarm. The Third Kazecage's presence meant he was participating in the war. The Third Kazekage was considered the strongest Kazekage. Even Hiruzen might not be able to defeat him. Tsunade was overestimating him, though. The strongest Kazekage wasn't the third. After all, he had been killed and turned into a puppet by Sasori. Regardless of whether Sasori used tricks or schemes, it didn't change the fact that the so-called strongest Kazekage had been defeated. But to Orochimaru and the others, the Third Kazekage was still a formidable opponent. "Do you have a plan?" Tsunade asked Jiraiya and Orochimaru. Orochimaru has already sent someone back to Konoha to inform the Hokage. "We have to stall for time," Jiraiya said. Tsunade nodded. That was their only option. They had to wait for Hiruzen's instructions. Shin enjoyed his roasted rabbit, ignoring the curious stares from Kushina and Mikoto. He cleared his throat. "Kushina, Mikoto, is something wrong with the rabbit? Why are you staring at me like that?" "We're just curious," Mikoto said. They were both puzzled by Shin bringing Konan back. They didn't believe he had done it out of pure compassion. "What's there to be curious about? Finish eating, and let's head back to camp to report," Shin said. They were on a mission to scout for enemy shinobi in the area. "Konan, here's a rabbit leg for you." Shin offered Konan a leg. Konan looked at him timidly, then at the rabbit leg with longing, but she didn't dare take it. "Go on, eat. Don't be afraid," Mikoto said gently. "Yeah, we won't hurt you," Kushina added. Unable to resist the temptation, Konan finally took the rabbit leg and nibbled on it. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She had managed to find some mushrooms, but then she encountered the bear and almost died. A single rabbit wasn't enough, so they roasted the mushrooms Konan had found and a bear paw as well. "Bear paw is so good. What about the rest?" Kushina looked at the bear carcass. There were 3 more paws, and they hadn't even touched the meat. "We can't waste it." Shin sealed the carcass in a scroll. "Konan, are you coming with us, or are you going to continue wandering around?" Shin asked Konan. "Come with us. It's dangerous for a little girl to be alone," Kushina said. "The entire Land of Rain is dangerous right now. You should stay with us," Mikoto added. You really want me to come with you?" Konan asked timidly. She was young, but the war had forced her to mature quickly. She knew she was a burden. "It's your choice, Konan. If you want to come with us, you can. If you want to leave, we won't stop you," Shin said. He wouldn't force her either way. I want to go with you," Konan said, looking at Shin. "All right, let's go then." Shin smiled and led Konan out of the forest. They arrived at a small town. Due to the war, it was practically deserted. They bought Konan some new clothes at a clothing store, then found an inn and had Mikoto help Konan wash up and change. She was covered in mud from being chased by the bear. They then headed back to the Konoha camp. No one questioned them about the little girl, they were Tsunade students, after all. This was the battlefield between Konoha and Suna. Orochimaru was the commander, with Tsunade and Jiraiya as his deputies. No one would question them. As for the original commander, Sakumo Hatake, he had been transferred to the Iwa front. They went to find Tsunade. She was surprised to see Konan. "Who's this little girl?" Tsunade asked Shin. "Her name is Konan. I saved her in the forest and brought her back. She can stay with you for now." Shin and his team often went on missions. It was better for Konan to stay with Tsunade, who was responsible for treating the injured and developing antidotes for Chiyo's poison. Tsunade rarely participated in direct combat. Tsunade frowned. "Wasn't it dangerous to bring a stranger into the camp?" "She could be a spy." "Don't worry," Shin said, sensing her concern. Tsunade trusted Shin. She nodded and said to Konan, "You can stay with me for now." Konan took a step back and looked at Shin, clinging to his clothes. She was anxious in this unfamiliar environment. Only Shin, her savior, could give her a sense of security. "Don't worry, Konan. If I'm in camp, you can stay with me. But if I'm on a mission, you'll have to stay with Tsunade. It's too dangerous to take you with me." Shin pinched Konan's cheek. It was so soft, he couldn't resist pinching it again. Konan blushed and nodded. "Tsunade, we have a problem." Jiraiya and Orochimaru suddenly arrived. Their presence meant trouble. Jiraiya looked at Konan curiously. "Didn't you say there was a problem? Tell us what it is." Yeah, business first." Jiraiya turned serious. He wasn't interested in some random little girl. "I'll explain. The third Kazekage is here," Orochimaru said. It was better than letting Jiraiya waste time with his rambling. "What?" Tsunade's eyes widened in alarm. The third Kazekage's presence meant he was participating in the war. The third Kazekage was considered the strongest Kazekage. Even Hiruzen might not be able to defeat him. Tsunade was overestimating him, though. The strongest Kazekage wasn't the third. After all, he had been killed and turned into a puppet by Sasori. Regardless of whether Sasori used tricks or schemes, it didn't change the fact that the so-called strongest Kazekage had been defeated. But to Orochimaru and the others, the third Kazekage was still a formidable opponent. "Do you have a plan?" Tsunade asked Jiraiya and Orochimaru. Orochimaru has already sent someone back to Konoha to inform the Hokage. "We have to stall for time," Jiraiya said. Tsunade nodded. That was their only option. They had to wait for Hiruzen's instructions. The third Kazekage led the Suna forces in a fierce charge. Orochimaru had erected a tall earth wall as a barrier, but he didn't expect it to hold for long. It was merely a delaying tactic. Retreating was the wisest course of action, but they had to choose the right moment. Otherwise, they'd be hunted down by Suna, and perhaps even a Megacure would join in for a share of the spoils. "I hear the third Kazekage boasts absolute defense." Shin's eyes were fixed on the third Kazekage, who looked deceptively young. He was a genius, possessing the magnet release Kekkei Genkai. It was likely a Kekkei Genkai he had developed himself. The fourth Kazekage, Rosa, had learned magnet release from him. "I don't know about an absolute defense, but his defense is certainly strong. Even Tsunade couldn't break through his iron sand," Orochimaru said. He looked at Shin. "Shin-kun, do you have a way to break through his defenses? If even Tsunade can't do it, what makes you think I can?" "I'm just a Chunin." "Oh? Are you really only Chunin, Shin-kun?" Orochimaru gave him a knowing look. "Who knows?" Shin watched the approaching Suna forces, drew his Kusanagi sword, and leaped over the earth wall. Orochimaru frowned. "Orochimaru-sama, he went down there. Should we bring him back?" A Jainin asked Orochimaru. "Observe. Perhaps he'll surprise us. I'm quite curious." Orochimaru waved a hand dismissively, his snake-like eyes gleaming with anticipation. You'll be my whetstone. Shin's eyes also held a glint of excitement. He didn't know exactly how strong he was, but the battlefield was the perfect testing ground. He wasn't afraid of danger. His Manjiki Sharingan abilities could protect him. With Yomotsu Hirasaka, he could escape any situation. Wielding his Kusanagi sword, Shin charged towards the Suna forces, a blur of motion against the backdrop of the battlefield. He's fast. Orochimaru's eyes widened. Even he would struggle to dodge at that speed. Clang! Shin's sword clashed against the third Kazekage iron sand, sending the Kazekage flying. If the Kazekage hadn't sensed the danger and used his magnet release to defend at the last moment, he would be dead. What? The Suna shinobi stared in disbelief at the young boy who had just sent their Kazekage flying with a single blow. They couldn't believe their eyes. This kid, who looked no older than 12, had repelled their Kazekage? At the Konoha camp, Tsunade clenched her fists. Damn it, he's reckless. Orochimaru, why did you let him go? Why didn't you stop him? She glared at Orochimaru. She had been treating some injured shinobi and had arrived late. She hadn't expected Shin to charge into the enemy ranks alone. Tsunade, do you want to go down there too? Orochimaru asked, seeing her agitation. You're still injured. Even if you go, you won't be much help. If he dared to face them, he must have a plan. You'd just be a burden. Tsunade hesitated. He was right. She would be a liability in her current state. Shin had space-time ninjutsu, he should be fine. She'd give him a good scolding when he got back. Are you all stunned? Shin looked at the Suna shinobi, who were frozen in shock. He swung his sword, cutting down several of them. Their death snapped the others out of their daze. They glared at Shin with fury. Shin charged into the enemy ranks. They wouldn't dare use large-scale ninjutsu now. That was how the Third Kazekage had been able to fight 1,000 shinobi for 3 days and 3 nights. They didn't use powerful jutsu for fear of harming their own comrades. With their own allies mixed in with the enemies, how could they use ninjutsu? Shin reveled in the chaos. In terms of taijutsu, perhaps only the Third Kazekage could match him. And in kenjutsu, he believed he was unmatched in the shinobi world. Flash slash! He combined the body flicker jutsu with his swordsmanship, killing over a dozen Suna shinobi in an instant, including a Jainin. Weak. Shin flicked the blood off his Kusanagi sword. He had already killed dozens. His sword danced through the enemy ranks like a reaper's scythe. He kicked a shinobi who tried to attack him from behind. The man flew through the air and landed with a sickening thud, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Wind-style Rasen Shuriken. The giant shuriken, formed from swirling wind chakra, shot towards the Suna forces. It exploded, the countless tiny needles tearing through flesh and bone. Shin had aimed for the densest part of the enemy formation. The shinobi there were helpless against the Rasen Shuriken. Move! Scatter! The Third Kazekage yelled. He had a gash on his chest, courtesy of Shin's sword. Even with his iron sand defense, he had still been injured. The Kusanagi sword was incredibly sharp, and Shin's strength was monstrous. Thankfully, the Kazekage's defense was strong, or he would have been gutted. I'm almost tempted to copy his magnet release, Shin mused, seeing the Kazekage's relatively minor injury. But he didn't. He had learned that Uchiha Ryota had awakened the Manjiki Sharingan. He was saving his last advanced replication card for that. His own Manjiki Sharingan had reached its limit, but it still hadn't evolved into the eternal Manjiki Sharingan. He wanted to copy another Manjiki Sharingan to help his own evolve. Compared to the eternal Manjiki Sharingan, magnet release was nothing. The choice was obvious. The Third Kazekage ordered his men to retreat, then faced Shin alone. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he simply didn't want his men to get caught in the crossfire. He glared at Shin with murderous intent. If he hadn't reacted quickly, he would have been killed by Shin's sword. Shin and the Third Kazekage faced each other. The other Suna shinobi formed a circle around them. Kazekage-sama, do you need assistance? Chiyo asked. No. The Kazekage refused. He wasn't going to gang up on a kid. Chiyo frowned. They couldn't underestimate this boy. He had injured the Kazekage with a single blow. She felt the Kazekage was being arrogant. This could end badly. Vacuum slash. Shin swung his sword with full force, slicing through the air. A blade of compressed air shot towards the Kazekage. Creating an air blade with a sword was far more difficult than with a punch. The air blade was incredibly fast. The Kazekage's eyes widened. Magnet release, Iron Sand World method. Iron sand swirled around the Kazekage, forming an impenetrable sphere. The air blade struck the iron sand, sparks flying. It slowly cut through the iron sand, but the defense was thick, over 30 centimeters. The air blade managed to penetrate 20 centimeters before dissipating. Couldn't break it. Disappointing. Shin sheathed his sword. But since you like staying in there so much, why don't you stay there forever? Ice release, Ice Age. Shin's hands flew through a series of hand seals, 15 seals in 2 seconds. An icy chill emanated from him. Ignoring the chakra cost, frost spread from his feet, covering the ground in a thick layer of ice. The iron sand sphere encasing the Kazekage was instantly frozen. The ice continued to spread outwards. Retreat! Everyone, retreat! Chiyo yelled, leading the Suna forces in a hasty retreat. Those further away were fine, but the shinobi near the front couldn't escape. The stronger ones managed to flee, but the Chunin were too slow. They were frozen solid, encased in ice. Within moments, a 1-kilometer radius was transformed into a world of ice. Hundreds of ice pillars stood frozen in this icy wasteland. They were the Suna shinobi who hadn't been able to escape. Still not as powerful as Kuzan's Hi no Mi. Shin observed his Ice Age jutsu. He had developed it based on Kuzan's Devil Fruit ability, but it was still far weaker. Kuzan could freeze dozens of kilometers of ocean with ease. But Shin's ice release was still developing. Perhaps one day, he would surpass Kuzan. Shin wasn't completely satisfied, but the Suna and Konoha shinobi were stunned. That's ice release. When did he get ice release? He didn't tell me. Tsunade was indignant. What incredible power! Orochimaru's eyes widened in shock. Damn that brat! Chiyo almost fainted, seeing her frozen comrades. Quick! Save the Kazekage! Ibizo, Chiyo's brother, yelled, his eyes filled with worry. The third Kazekage was trapped in the ice. If they didn't rescue him soon, he would suffocate. They had to break the ice. If the Kazekage died here, Suna would be in danger. Ibizo charged forward, using wind release to attack the ice encasing the Kazekage. But the ice was as hard as steel. Shin watched them calmly. They wouldn't be able to break it. He wondered if the Kazekage could escape from the inside. The Kazekage had deactivated his iron sand defense. He looked at the ice surrounding him, his face pale. He manipulated the iron sand, forming various weapons, and attacked the ice from the inside. With attacks from both inside and outside, and with some shinobi using fire release, the ice finally shattered. The Kazekage emerged, gasping for air. The space within the sphere hadn't been large, the air had been thin. Retreat, the Kazekage ordered. He didn't try to attack Shin. He chose to retreat. The Suna shinobi wanted to save their frozen comrades, but they knew the chances of survival were slim. You think you can just retreat? Did you ask me? Shin charged towards them, his sword flashing. A massive air blade sliced through the ice. Puppet technique, human puppet. Chiyo used the human puppet jutsu to defend, and the third Kazekage used his strongest iron sand defense. The other Suna shinobi also used defensive jutsu. The sight was spectacular, even more so than when Shin had faced the combined might of Kirigakure. The air blade sliced through 10 puppets and broke through the Kazekage's iron sand defense. The air blade was too large, and the Kazekage's iron sand wall wasn't thick enough. But after breaking through the iron sand, the air blade's power was spent. It was easily blocked by the other Suna shinobi's defenses. The Suna forces retreated hastily, abandoning their frozen comrades. The chances of survival for those trapped in the ice were slim. The Kazekage wouldn't risk further losses to save them. If Shin used another Ice Age jutsu, the consequences would be dire. Chiyo winced as she retrieved the broken human puppet. It was a masterpiece by the previous generation's puppet master, Monzemon Chikamatsu. It was irreplaceable, and now it was damaged. She didn't know if she could repair it. As she collected the puppet, she suddenly felt a chill, a sense of danger. She instinctively leaned to the side. A flash of white, and a sword pierced through her body. She had dodged slightly, avoiding a fatal blow. The sword, aimed for her heart, had missed, piercing her side instead. Too bad. Shin deactivated his Manjiki Sharingan, disappointed. He had almost killed Chiyo. He had used Yomotsu Hirasaka to open a small, invisible portal and thrust his Kusanagi sword through it. The sword had emerged from another portal near Chiyo, stabbing her from a distance of several hundred meters. This was another application of Yomotsu Hirasaka. Shin returned to the Konoha camp, greeted by awestruck stares. Before, he was just Tsunade's student. Now, he was a hero, a powerhouse who had single-handedly forced a retreat from 3,000 Suna shinobi. In their eyes, he was comparable to the Sandaime Hokage. If Shin knew what they were thinking, he would laugh. If Hiruzen faced the Third Kazekage and the Suna forces, he'd be dead in an instant. Among the current 5 Kage, the one Shin looked down on the most were the Third Hokage and the Third Mizukage. Not in terms of strength, but in terms of value. The Third Kazekage had magnet release, which Shin wanted to copy. If he hadn't been saving his advanced replication card for the Manjiki Sharingan, he would have copied it already. The Third Reikage had lightning release chakra mode, a powerful jutsu passed down through generations of Reikage. And the Third Tsukikage had dust release, a Kekkei that could disintegrate anything into atoms. The Third Hokage and Third Mizukage, however, had nothing that interested Shin. Hiruzen's mastery of ordinary jutsu was impressive, but he didn't have a Kekkei Genkai. He wasn't worth copying. Tsunade approached Shin with a frown and grabbed his ear. "You're quite capable, aren't you? Facing 3,000 Suna shinobi alone? Do you have a death wish?" she scolded. "Ahum, have some respect. There are people watching." Shin removed her hand. "I wasn't in any danger." "No danger? Do you know how powerful a coordinated ninjutsu assault from that many shinobi can be?" Shin knew. He had seen it during the Fourth Shinobi World War. But he had Yomotsu Hirasaka. He wasn't afraid of any combination jutsu. And he had charged into their ranks. They wouldn't dare use any large-scale jutsu for fear of friendly fire. "Shin-kun, I didn't expect you to be this strong." Orochimaru approached, his eyes filled with caution. He knew Shin was stronger than him. "That was ice release, wasn't it? I didn't know it could be so powerful." Orochimaru was intrigued by the ice release. He was always interested in powerful abilities. "It's nothing special," Shin said modestly, though his tone was a bit smug. He couldn't help it. "When did you learn ice release?" Tsunade asked. She was still angry that he hadn't told her. "Did he see her as an outsider?" "About 6 months ago. Shortly after you left for the border." "You knew for so long, and you didn't tell me?" Tsunade glared at him. Shin shivered. He had never seen her this angry before. "I'll be going now." Shin made a quick escape. Kushina and Mikoto were probably worried. He had to find them. "Kushina, Shin's back." Mikoto nudged Kushina, who had been lost in thought, snapping her out of her daze. "He's back." Kushina looked up and saw Shin. She rushed towards him and leaped into his arms. "Sorry for making you worry," Shin said, hugging her back. Mikoto and Konan also approached. Konan relaxed, relieved to see Shin's safe return. Mikoto checked him for injuries. Shin accepted her concern with a smile. Seeing that he was unharmed, Mikoto sighed in relief. You must be hungry. I'll make you something to eat. She went to prepare some meat from the bear Shin had brought back. I'm not that hungry. I didn't use much energy. Just a warm-up. Shin grinned. Tsunade, who had followed them, overheard his comment and rolled her eyes. A warm-up? His warm-up had resulted in hundreds of Suna shinobi dead. Don't brag. You must have used a lot of chakra, right? Tsunade asked. That ice release jutsu had frozen an entire kilometer. The chakra cost must have been immense. Chakra consumption? Shin shook his head. That was nothing to me. Have you forgotten how much chakra I have? Tsunade recalled his monstrous chakra reserves, rivaling those of a tailed beast. Right. I guess that wasn't much for you. She had thought her own chakra reserves were impressive, but Shin had put her to shame. She had the sage body, but hers was a weaker version. Shin's perfect sage body was the real deal. Konoha's reinforcements finally arrived. Hiruzen had sent Dan Shimura, leading 1,000 Konoha shinobi. Perhaps intimidated by Shin's display of power, Suna hadn't launched any further attacks in the past 3 days. But they hadn't retreated either. With Dan's arrival, command of the Konoha forces naturally fell to him. Dan's immediately gathered the shinobi for a meeting, eager to announce his new position as commander. The man craved power. Orochimaru, you managed to hold back the Third Kazekage? You're quite capable. Dan said to Orochimaru, his tone laced with disdain. It was all thanks to Shinkoan. I had nothing to do with it. If it weren't for him, Suna would have already invaded the Land of Fire. Orochimaru glanced at Dan's. Shinkoan? Dan's frowned. Uzumaki Shin. Surely you know him, Dan-sama? Orochimaru looked at Dan's pointedly. Uzumaki Shin. Dan's face contorted in anger. He had lost for Elite Jainin and several other shinobi trying to capture that brat. He had been so furious that he couldn't eat for days. Orochimaru noticed his reaction. It seemed Dan's had a grudge against Shin. He wasn't surprised. Dan's was the type to make enemies easily. And judging from his expression, he had probably been on the losing end of their encounter. What does he have to do with this? Dan's pushed down his anger and asked Orochimaru. Uzumaki Shin was barely 10 years old. Dan's couldn't imagine a child playing a significant role on the battlefield. Shinkoan single-handedly repelled the Third Kazekage and forced the retreat of 3,000 Suna shinobi. Otherwise, we would have been forced to retreat, and Suna would have invaded the Land of Fire. Orochimaru explained, watching Dan's reaction with amusement. Are you serious? Dan shot to his feet. He couldn't believe it. Repelling the Kazekage and 3,000 Suna shinobi? Even Hashirama Senju couldn't have done that at that age. He suspected Orochimaru was lying. Why would I lie, Dan-sama? You can ask anyone here. Dan's expression flickered. He finally understood why the shinobi he had sent to capture Shin had never returned. It wasn't Hiruzen who had interfered. It was that brat Uzumaki Shin who had killed them all. After a moment of silence, Dan's changed the subject. Where are Tsunade and Jiraiya? Most of the Jainin and Elite Jainin were present, but Tsunade and Jiraiya were missing. Dan-sama, Jiraiya-sama is severely injured and recovering. Tsunade-sama is busy treating the wounded, an Elite Jainin explained. HMPH. Dan snorted. He didn't care about Jiraiya's injuries, but he suspected Tsunade was deliberately avoiding him. He knew Tsunade disliked him. He then discussed strategies against Suna with the others. Finally, he said, summon Uzumaki Shin. Orochimaru looked at Dan's, curious about his intentions. At Shin's tent, a Chunin arrived. Shin-sama, Dan-sama requests your presence. Shin emerged from the tent and looked at the Chunin. Danzo wants to see me? Yes, Shin-sama. I'm here to deliver the message. The tune-in was respectful. Shin might be young, but his strength had earned him respect. All the shinobi in the camp treated him with deference. I understand. You're dismissed. Shin sent the tune-in away and entered the tent. Just as I expected, Danzo wants to see me, he said to Tsunade, who was sitting inside. She wasn't busy treating the wounded, the medics could handle that. It was just an excuse to avoid Danzo. Danzo's summons are never a good thing, Tsunade said. Yeah, don't go, Kushina agreed. Good or bad, I'm not afraid of him. I'll go see what he wants. Shin decided to meet with Danzo. Tsunade didn't stop him. She didn't think there was any danger. He arrived at Danzo's tent. Several root agents stood guard outside. Shin could sense their presence with his heightened senses. He had encountered root agents before and was familiar with their chakra signature. He ignored them and entered the tent. They didn't stop him, Danzo must have given them orders. Inside, Danzo was waiting for him. This was the first time Shin had properly met Danzo. Their first encounter had been a brief one when Shin first arrived in Konoha. The current Danzo was different. He hadn't implanted all those Sharingan in his body yet. But his aura was still dark and sinister. It was different from Orochimaru's, but even more unpleasant. Shin disliked him instantly. He had tried to capture him and killed Tsunade. Shin had no good feelings towards him. Uzumaki Shin. Danzo looked up at Shin. Dan-sama, what do you want with a tune-in like me? Shin smiled, but Danzo hated that smile. He had learned that his subordinates had been killed by Shin. He wanted to kill the brat. But he held back. He had investigated and confirmed that it was indeed Shin who had repelled the Third Kazekage and forced the Suna forces to retreat with his powerful ice-release jutsu. To be able to defeat the Kazekage and repel the Suna forces alone. Although Danzo hated to admit it, he was no match for Shin. If you have nothing to say, I'll be taking my leave. Shin saw Danzo's hesitant expression and turned to leave. Wait. Danzo stopped him. He had summoned Shin for a reason. Dan-sama, if you have something to say, spit it out. I don't have time to waste. Shin said with a nonchalant air. Danzo glared at Shin, his arrogance infuriating. Despite addressing him with the proper honorifics, Shin's lack of respect was clear. Danzo was delusional. Expecting respect from Shin was like expecting Hiruzen to step down and hand him the Hokage hat. Uzumaki Shin, your strength is impressive. Would you be interested in joining Root? Danzo suppressed his anger and extended the invitation. If Shin joined Root, he would forget about the deaths of his subordinates. Shin was clearly more valuable. Root? What's Root? I've never heard of it. Is it some insignificant organization? Shin feigned ignorance. Danzo couldn't hold back anymore. His Kage-level chakra exploded outwards, his eyes narrowed dangerously. Why so worked up, Dan-sama? Is this Root thing your creation? If so, I must criticize your marketing strategy. I've never even heard of it. Shin said with a straight face, though he was struggling to contain his laughter. If he laughed, Danzo would explode. He knew Danzo wasn't known for his patience. If that's all you wanted, Dan-sama, then goodbye. I have no interest in some unknown organization. Shin didn't give Danzo a chance to respond and used the body flicker jutsu to disappear. Danzo's face was a mask of fury. Uzumaki Shin, I'll remember this, he snarled. Shin, of course, didn't hear him. And even if he did, he wouldn't care. He wasn't afraid of fighting Danzo. He was strong enough to escape even a full-on assault from a hidden village. With that kind of power, he didn't have to be cautious or play nice. If he wanted to keep a low profile, he wouldn't have attacked the Suna forces. That display had revealed a portion of his true strength. He had another reason for attacking, though, a system mission he had received a few months ago. The mission was to help Konoha win the Second Shinobi World War. The reward was a divine replication card. There was no penalty for failure. He didn't want to fail, though. A divine replication card was too precious. It was a choice-based mission. He could choose to help any of the 6 villages involved in the war: Konoha, Suna, Iwa, Kumo, Kiri, or Omega-Q. The reward was the same regardless of which village he chose. He had chosen Konoha. Konoha was likely to win anyway, and he was a Konoha shinobi. Helping Konoha win the war wasn't a difficult task. He might not even have to do anything. But that was assuming there were no unexpected events. The timeline had already diverged, anything was possible. Regardless, Shin was determined to get that divine replication card. With it, he could copy the Rinnegan. Madara Uchiha's Rinnegan was currently with Nagato. Trying to steal it was out of the question. If Shin tried to take the Rinnegan, Madara would definitely intervene. Shin had never considered stealing the Rinnegan anyway. He preferred his own eyes. He wouldn't transplant someone else's. He could evolve his own eyes, there was no need for a transplant. And transplanted eyes were never fully compatible with the new host. Nagato couldn't even use the Rinnegan's full power. Even if Shin could use it better than Nagato, he probably wouldn't be able to match Madara. But the eyes copied with the system's replication cards were different. They would be perfectly compatible with him. "You're back." Tsunade approached Shin curiously. What did Danzo want? Kushina and Mikoto also gathered around, eager to hear what that shady character was up to. They also wanted to warn Shin. Nothing much. He wanted me to join Root, Shin said. Tsunade nodded. That wasn't surprising. Danzo would definitely try to recruit Shin. Was that all? Kushina asked. He probably had other motives. Maybe he's interested in my ice release. But I didn't give him a chance to elaborate. Shin had gone to see Danzo to annoy him, to see his angry expression. He had succeeded. Danzo's face had been livid. No wonder you came back so quickly. He must have been furious, Tsunade chuckled. But knowing that old geezer, he'll definitely try to get back at you. Tsunade's smile vanished. Danzo was vindictive. Shin had angered him, there would be repercussions. It doesn't matter. Shin wasn't afraid of Danzo's revenge. If Danzo pushed him too far, he wouldn't hesitate to kill him. He glanced at Kushina and Mikoto. He wasn't worried about Danzo's revenge on himself, but he was worried about them. He thought of a solution, the transcription seal. He could seal his Manjiki Sharingan abilities into their eyes, set to activate under certain conditions. Itachi had implanted the Amaterasu transcription seal in Sasuke's eye, set to activate if he saw Obito's Sharingan. Shin knew how to use the transcription seal, but he hadn't tested it yet. He didn't want to risk using it on Kushina and Mikoto without being sure it was safe. But that was easily solved. He just needed a test subject. And finding one was easy. They were in the middle of a war with Suna. He could just capture a Suna shinobi. Shin decided to do just that. He wondered which unlucky Suna shinobi would be his test subject. "How's Konan's training coming along?" Shin asked, patting Konan's head. Still refining chakra, Konan replied, nuzzling his hand. She seemed to enjoy his head pats. At the Konoha-Suna battlefront, things had been quiet since Shin repelled the Suna forces. They seemed to be genuinely intimidated by him. Danzo, however, wasn't impressed by their timidness. He wanted to take advantage of the situation and earn some glory for himself, increasing his chances of becoming Hokage. So, he decided to launch a counterattack. No one objected to his decision. With the arrival of reinforcements, they outnumbered Suna. It was the perfect time to strike back. At the Konoha logistics base, Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto were busy with their assigned duties. Danzo had assigned them to the logistics department. Shin was happy with this arrangement. Logistics work was safe and relatively comfortable. Kushina, Mikoto, come with me. Shin called out to the girls, stepping out of the tent. They followed him, confused, to a secluded area. Mikoto, keep watch. If anyone approaches, chase them away. Kushina, sit down. What are you doing, Shin? Mikoto asked. Giving you some life-saving gifts. Shin used the transcription seal on Kushina, implanting his 2 Manjiki Sharingan abilities into her eyes. Transcription seal, Tenmome. It could rewind her personal time by 3 minutes. Shin set 2 activation conditions, manual activation with chakra, and automatic activation upon receiving a fatal injury. Transcription seal, Yomotsu Hirasaka. It could also be activated manually with chakra. The passive trigger was linked to Tenmome. If she activated Yomotsu Hirasaka after Tenmome, she would be transported to Shin's location. This meant that if Shin wasn't around and Kushina was in danger, she could use Yomotsu Hirasaka to teleport to him. After sealing the abilities into Kushina's eyes, Shin did the same for Mikoto. He then explained the transcription seal and its triggers to them. By the way, do you feel any discomfort? Shin had captured a Suna shinobi the night before and used him as a test subject. The experiment had shown no adverse effects, but he was still a bit worried. My eyes itched a bit when you were applying the seal, but I feel fine now, Kushina said. Me too, Mikoto confirmed. That's good. Let's head back. Shin's eyes suddenly narrowed. The supply depot was on fire. What's going on? Kushina stared at the blazing inferno. It must be a Suna attack. They've been quiet for days, and now they're targeting our supplies. Shin led Kushina and Mikoto towards the commotion. By the time they arrived, Konoha shinobi were already engaged in battle with Suna shinobi. Among them was a monk who stood out. The monk was powerful, controlling sand to attack. Even Jainin were no match for him. That chakra, is he the One-Tails Jinkriki? Shin recognized the monk. It was Bunpuku, the current One-Tails Jinkriki. Wasn't Bunpuku imprisoned? Did Suna release him out of desperation? Shin wondered. Engage. But be careful, Shin said to Kushina and Mikoto. They nodded. Mikoto activated her Sharingan. It had evolved to 3-Tomo. She was not yet 11 and already had a 3-Tomo Sharingan. But Shin had helped her awaken it through rather unpleasant means. Mikoto had been angry at him for days. Kushina, you assist me, Mikoto said. Hey, why can't you assist me? Mikoto ignored her and unleashed a massive fireball, engulfing a Suna shinobi. The shinobi was thrown back several meters, landing motionless, his body still burning. Kushina used the adamantine sealing chains to bind 3 Suna shinobi. Mikoto then threw 3 kunai, each a precise and fatal blow. Shin nodded approvingly. Kushina was controlling and protecting Mikoto, while Mikoto was the attacker. Their teamwork was excellent. Monk, you're not holding back at all, are you? Shin intercepted Bunpuku, the One-Tails Jinkriki. Bunpuku frowned at Shin. He couldn't attack a child. He's underestimating me. Shin could sense Bunpuku's disdain. He didn't waste his breath. He launched a kick at Bunpuku, the force of the blow creating a sonic boom. Bunpuku was sent flying, landing on his stomach, clutching his gut. He felt like his insides were twisting, the pain was unbearable. Underestimating your opponent comes at a price. But you're a Jinkriki, you're quite durable. Bunpuku couldn't hear Shin anymore. The pain had overwhelmed him. As his consciousness faded, an ominous chakra enveloped him. Is that Shukaku? Is it coming out? Shin watched as Bunpuku was completely enveloped in the One-Tails chakra. Then, a massive, Tarnuka-like figure emerged, a single tail swaying behind it. Shin recognized it instantly. Shukaku, the One-Tails. Gahawaha! I'm finally free! Shukaku roared. Shin, what is that thing? Kushina and Mikoto retreated to Shin's side. A tailed beast. But it's just the one tails. I hear the number of tails indicates their strength. The one tails is the weakest. Shin deliberately raised his voice for Shukaku to hear. Shukaku was enraged. Weakest? He couldn't tolerate that insult. Shin had only said that to provoke Shukaku. The one tails wasn't the weakest of the tailed beasts. It wasn't the strongest either. It was somewhere in the middle. To other shinobi, tailed beasts were a disaster. Their immense size and destructive power made them practically invincible. But to Shin, even the nine tails was nothing. His Manjiki Sharingan could control any tailed beast except for the 10 tails. A single glance could subdue Shukaku. You're the one who called me the weakest of the tailed beasts. Shukaku glared at Shin. This brat was as annoying as that damned fox. The damned fox was, of course, Kurama, who often judged a tailed beast's strength by the number of tails and looked down on Shukaku. That was why Shukaku and Kurama didn't get along. That's right. I heard it from Kurama himself. The one tails is the weakest. It should be removed from the tailed beasts club. Shin said, barely suppressing a grin. That damned fox. I'll rip its fur off one day. And you'll die too. Shukaku swiped at Shin with its claws. Shin grabbed Kushina and Mikoto, then used the body flicker jutsu to dodge. Shukaku's attack missed, its claws gouging the earth. The ground cracked, and the entire Konoha camp shook. Tailed beasts were powerful. In a one-on-one fight, a very strong Kage could defeat one. But on the battlefield, a tailed beast's destructive power was amplified tenfold. What's going on? Why is the one tails here? Tsunade arrived, her eyes fixed on Shukaku. Dans had taken most of the Konoha forces to attack Suna, but Tsunade had stayed behind to treat the wounded and develop antidotes for Chiyo's poison. She couldn't ignore the commotion caused by Shukaku's appearance. You'll have to ask Suna about that, Shin said with a shrug. Damn you, brat! I'll kill you. Wind release, drilling air bullet. Shukaku opened its maw and unleashed a massive wind sphere. Tsunade stepped forward to block the attack. I'll handle this, Shin said. Tsunade could probably block it, but it would be a struggle. Shukaku wasn't weak. Ice release, triple ice wall. 3 massive ice walls materialized. Shukaku's attack shattered the first 2, but the third held. Shukaku seems to have a grudge against you. What did you do? Tsunade asked Shin, turning to face him. Nothing much. He just said Shukaku is the weakest of the tailed beasts, Kushina replied. Tsunade gave Shin an exasperated look. Of course Shukaku was angry. Shin had insulted him. You two can't handle this. I'll take care of it. You go deal with the other Suna shinobi, Shin said to Tsunade and the girls. The ice wall in front of him shattered, and he vanished in a flash. Thud! Shukaku was sent flying, crashing to the ground. He can handle the one tails. Let's go deal with those Suna bastards. Tsunade watched in surprise as Shin sent the tailed beast flying with a single kick. A human, kicking a tailed beast? Had their roles been reversed? I want to fight that big guy too. Kushina was eager to join the fray. Mikoto held her back. Kushina, don't be reckless. Kushina glared at Mikoto. I'm not being reckless. That big guy is all bark and no bite. Tsunade smacked Kushina on the head. Mikoto's right. Don't be foolish. Even I'm no match for that thing. You're not a match for it. That doesn't mean I'm not either, Kushina muttered under her breath. Shin didn't hear their conversation. He was currently using Shukaku as a punching bag. He unleashed his taijutsu skills, a mix of kicks, punches, and throws, honed through years of training. He also used the strength of 100 seal, each blow carrying monstrous power. Each strike sent Shukaku flying. He was practically playing volleyball with the tailed beast. Damn you, little insect! I'll kill you. Shukaku roared, its voice filled with rage. Shin punched it in the jaw, shutting it up. He then launched it into the air with a powerful uppercut. Shukaku, you should thank me. I'm helping you achieve your dream of flying. As Shukaku fell from the sky, Shin leaped up and delivered a kick, sending it even higher. Wind-style Rasen Shuriken. He threw a massive Rasen Shuriken at the falling Shukaku. Shukaku screamed in pain. It might be a chakra construct, but it could still feel pain. That hurt. I'll kill you. Shukaku crashed to the ground, creating a large crater. One of its arms was missing, ripped off by the Rasen Shuriken. Shin was impressed. Even with a missing arm, Shukaku was still full of bluster. It might be weak and getting its ass kicked. But Shin soon understood why Shukaku didn't seem to care about its missing arm. The arm regenerated. The arm was back, but Shin noticed that Shukaku's body had shrunk slightly. He realized that Shukaku, while a living being, wasn't an ordinary one. It was a life form created by the Sage of Six Paths from the Ten Tails chakra using yin-yang release. Even if it lost an arm, it could simply use chakra from other parts of its body to regenerate. But overall, its chakra had decreased, hence the smaller size. Surprised, aren't you? You think I'm that easy to defeat? Die, insect! Shukaku unleashed a barrage of drilling air bullets. You're all bark and no bite, Shin scoffed. He easily dispersed the wind bullets with his punches. Those attacks were only effective against those below Kage level. And those at Kage level could easily dodge them. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this fanfic reading so far. Since the fanfic is still in progress, I can only make about 2 more episodes before I'm caught up with the writer. If any of you have recommendations for completed fanfics you'd like to see adapted, feel free to drop them in the comments. It would really help me pick something I can keep working on consistently. See you next time.